In case you were not aware, one of the industries that really collapsed as we shut our borders and set up the Hermit Kingdom during COVID was education. Many educational institutes in New Zealand were supplementing and in some ways had become very reliant on income from foreign students coming to New Zealand, domiciling themselves here for the course of their studies and paying fees far in excess of what New Zealanders might be paid to the educational institute. Universities in particular did very, very well out of this. But the COVID restrictions essentially killed the industry dead. And I can remember talking to a consultant called Tommy Honey who said, it's not about putting up a sign that says back in 5 minutes. We put up a sign for foreign students that said closed. And we may well be seeing the results of that loss of income now as universities in particular start to retrench in terms of staff. But the Prime Minister is going to China late this month for a trade mission. Many of these students came from China, so will we try and resuscitate? The tertiary foreign student industry? We're joined now to discuss this issue by Chris Whelan, the CEO of Universities New Zealand. Chris, thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Morning.
All right. Is it fair to say that the foreign student market basically is dead at the moment or massively reduced as to what it was pre-COVID?
Look, it's massively reduced, but it's looking very promising. So our new to New Zealand first-year student enrolments are actually 10% above the same group pre-COVID. So that's really good news for the future. But the problem is going to be that we still need the second. We need those students to roll through into second year, and then into third year, and then into fourth year. So it's going to take some time to rebuild the pipeline.
Yeah, Chris, how reliant or how big a part of the income of our tertiary institutions and our universities were foreign students prior to COVID?
So a very significant part, but it varied from university to university. So on average, it was about 17% of our students and about the same of university revenue.
Okay, so it was the same. So 17%, that's a lot of... What did that fall to at the height of COVID restrictions?
So... Again, it varied from university to university because the actual experience of COVID was that many universities actually told their students, hey, we don't think this is going to take, we don't think this is going to be 3-year closed borders. We think this is just going to be maybe 6 months or maybe 12 months. Start with us and we'll get you here as soon as we can. So actually, a number of universities kept their students all the way through COVID. The students didn't get what they paid for, which was obviously an experience of living, studying and working in an English-speaking country. But actually, they did stick it out with universities. Other universities went the other way and said, no, we're not going to try to provide a qualification to you because we just don't have the resources or the capability on the ground. It just depends on the university.
Chris, how many students did we lose? Are you telling me that there was no impact on the student market?
There was an enormous impact, but as I say, it varied from university to university. Some lost all of their students, their international students, and some lost maybe 2/3, and some, even slightly less than that.
Did we lose our place in the market? A lot of talk about the Australians firing up their foreign education market very quickly and us being caught a bit flat-footed.
Look, they got back into the market well before us, so we were absolutely the last country in the world to reopen our borders to international students. And every country, so throughout the pandemic, Canada and the United Kingdom, for example, that didn't close their borders, they actually achieved their 10-year growth targets within 1 year, just simply because students had, wanted to go somewhere and they couldn't go.
And there was pent-up demand, and we missed that boat, right?
We did. Australia opened a year before us, and they have had massive growth in that year. They're well ahead of us in terms of rebuilding their pipeline. Our early numbers are looking positive, but, I think because we were the last to reopen, we've got a much steeper hill to climb.
Okay. Are you guys, or is the education industry represented in this trade trip to China led by the Prime Minister later this month?
Yes, we are. Yes, we have university representatives there.
Okay, is it a big deal?
Look, it's like everything. I mean, there is no single thing. When you're marketing yourselves to overseas, there's no single thing that works, but it's a whole lot of little things together. Countries like China having very good relationships is absolutely key to business. Whether that's government to government, whether it's institution to institution, and even just being visible to students, talking to our alumni, they're all a key part of basically restarting our business there.
The other thing I would observe, Chris, is that the absence of foreign students, be they Chinese or anyone else, in our major cities, and I know this has had a massive impact in Wellington. So the accommodation they used to occupy is all free. And actually, during times of COVID, a lot of accommodation in Wellington turned over to emergency housing, which had massive social impacts inside Wellington City, I know from personal observation. Is the infrastructure that was created to support foreign students when they came here, does that have to be reactivated?
To some extent, yes, it does. For universities, they operate a large number of beds, around 20-something thousand beds across the country. There's always more demand than supply, but universities have always, in the past, prioritised those beds to international students who just don't know how to live in New Zealand or where to go, and they need a kind of a good, safe starting point to orient themselves. So basically it just means that universities have had to reprioritise beds to international students this year over, in some cases, domestic students.
Yeah. Do you think we could have done better? Do you think we had to destroy this industry, which is now in the process of rebuilding in COVID? Was it an unintended consequence, or was it a deliberate thing by the government?
Look, that's not something I can really comment on. I mean, obviously, it would have been very nice if we hadn't closed our borders, but then there's a whole lot of public health considerations that are frankly above my pay grade.
Yeah. Chris, would you say some of the retrenchment going on in universities at the moment, and geez, I don't know anyone in the tertiary sector who doesn't say it's bloody tough and worrying at the moment, is that in part a result of the loss of the 17% of income that was earned through foreign students?
Absolutely. I mean, that's a key factor, along with a range of other factors, things that in some cases we can predict, like a long-term decline in funding per student, but other things that we couldn't predict, like the fact that when borders reopened, students that were partway through their degrees have not continued because they've gone offshore to do a gap year. So there's a few of those kind of factors. Some of them are short-term, and we're expecting those students will come back. Others, are longer term and will take more time, like rebuilding the international student pipeline.
Yeah. Was there any consideration by the university industry or community in not going back to the pre-COVID model?
Well, we're sort of locked into the pre-COVID model by what is a long-term funding system. So the funding system basically was established in the early 90s. It's changed in the margins since then, but in the main, it's basically the same thing. And it basically funds universities on a per-student basis, plus some funding for research. Now, that funding per student has, every year pretty much declined in real terms. And so universities have been forced to chase volume, chase numbers of students to basically make up the shortfalls. So effectively we're locked into a kind of a volume model. I think that, it has significant long-term consequences because simply chasing volume is probably not sustainable or sensible. But it's going to need a long-term serious conversation with government to really explore what the options might look like.
Yeah. And the delegation going with the Prime Minister Hitkins later this month to China, do they have a specific, are they going to sign some agreement, or is it just a getting to know you again sort of trip?
It'll be a combination of things. I haven't seen the exact itinerary, but usually they'll cram as much as they can into them to meet as many people as possible, to sign agreements wherever possible. I mean, one of the great things about having, say, a Prime Minister go is it gives very high-level access, and it creates, real impetus, in fact, for people to create agreements to sign and to make those agreements work.
Yeah. Chris, I know it's important for the financial viability of universities, and as you said, the cuts at the moment are directly related, at least in part, to the collapse of foreign students. Do you think most New Zealanders like the fact that we're selling our souls? And I'm going to be brutally honest. To a lot of New Zealanders, it's like all these Asians coming here taking varsity places off Kiwis. Some people aren't going to be happy to see all the foreign students back.
Look, we often get that coming through, in sort of public sentiment type surveys. It's unfortunate because it's just not the case. These students are not actually displacing domestic students. They're actually doing the exact opposite, which is actually they're making it cheaper for us to be able to keep the quality of our education high and to be able to offer a wider range of programs to our domestic students than would be the case if we just didn't have those additional international students.
And some of them also fulfil gaps in our labour market which are all too evident right now, and we kind of miss them overall, I think, in a lot of ways.
Look, absolutely, and we spend a lot of time looking at the data behind that. We know that probably not enough international students work while they're here. About 35% will actually work part-time while they're studying. But of that 35%, the ones that are still in New Zealand after they graduate, 80% were working while they studied, and that 80% who continue to work here, 10 and 11 are in degree-level type jobs. They're doing the kind of things where industry is crying out the skilled workers. They're a great pool of skill for a country which just doesn't have enough labour.
Chris, that is all bloody interesting stuff. I thank you very much for joining us and for changing your availability and getting into the office early because we had a snafu with Winston. So thank you very much indeed for your time. Great talking to you. That is Chris Whelan, CEO at Universities New Zealand. Yes, it's basically the government's approach on COVID wiped out the foreign student industry. They're trying to get it back. And yes, all the cuts at the varsities now, which are causing, people won't be able to afford their Chardonnay at dinner parties, will they? You can put it down to losing the foreign students. How do you feel about foreign students? Do they change our culture in a way we don't like? I'm saying getting them back, we'd become reliant on them in a number of ways, so we need to get them back, and that is part of this trade mission to China.